Hello everybody and welcome back to Typical City. Rodri's back. I hear you cry, Rodri's the man. He's the main figurehead that's going to spearhead Manchester City's title challenge once again. Those 3 domestic losses in a row, you can forget about that. Nothing to worry about now. Rodri's back. But for me, John Stones is arguably just as big an important player to return to the squad. And we saw it at the end of last season. His involvement in Manchester City's squad was a huge factor in the treble that we won. I know the layman and the rival fans will all point the finger at Rodri and how important he is because yes, without Rodri, 3 games without Rodri, 3 losses. That was clear. I understand that's the simplest way of looking at things, but not only is Rodri back, John Stones is back. And we saw that double pivot, and it started last season against RB Leipzig, the 7-0 thrashing that we gave RB Leipzig at the Etihad. That was John Stones' first game where he was really trusted in that role, in defensive midfield alongside John Stones. So was it defensive midfield or more of an inverted fullback or a halfback, whatever position you want to call it, where he was fluid, let's call it, where he was in and out of defence, but predominantly throughout the game because City predominantly have the ball, and with the ball, John Stones pushes into defensive midfield. And from that point, that performance as a standalone performance was flawless, literally flawless. He didn't give the ball away a single time, not once. Against RB Leipzig. John Stones is going to be a huge figure for Manchester City, and I'm a huge fan of John Stones. I love Rodri, don't get me wrong, the best defensive midfielder in the world, hands down, right now. But John Stones sitting alongside him, the rest of the league can start to panic again because they don't understand what's about to hit them, like a train. Because John Stones was a spearhead for Manchester City throughout those 20 games at the end of last season, and from that game, the RB Leipzig game, with 20 games to go, we kept 8 clean sheets, all the way to the Champions League final. And a vital clean sheet it was in the Champions League final. And in that Champions League final, John Stones completed as many dribbles as Lionel Messi, the most in a Champions League final since Lionel Messi did it last in his previous Champions League final in 2015. That's the figures John Stones was putting on the board. Going alongside playing in a number 8 almost, up and down the pitch, a box-to-box midfielder. He was serene, so composed and calm whenever he had the ball, just head up, slow the game down and dictate in the play. Going forward, he was just slaloming past attacking presses. Martinez and Dzeko, who's not going to be the greatest at the press, he was just breezing past them like they weren't there. An incredible performance from John Stones, and now he's back. He got the 60 minutes against Italy, albeit a little bit rusty at the start of the game. That's to be expected, coming back from a long-term injury like that. Back in the squad, though, he grew into that game against Italy, and then he got the half an hour against Australia as well. So that's the international break, doing a good thing for Manchester City. For once, the international break has given him some match fitness. Now he can walk straight back in to this Manchester City side, hopefully starting against Brighton. But I want to go into deep diving why he is so important. So this is what you're familiar with, City fans, this season. This is the formation that we've had to get used to. It's different from last season. This is on paper. Right now, when you see the starting 11 for a Manchester City side, this has usually been the starting 11, the most common starting 11 we've seen this season. Maybe Doku instead of Grealish potentially, but the formation is what I'm talking about ultimately, not necessarily always the individuals, but the formation. Phil Foden's role is interesting because straight away, you know, Alvarez has been tucking in and Foden has been tucking inside there as well, which what that does is gives Kyle Walker the freedom to bomb it forward. Now, with possession, that's the formation we usually see with the 3 at the back when we've got the ball, and that's what Pep likes to do. He likes to have the foundation of 5 at the back with 5 up top, and there's your 5 here with Nathan Ake, Ruben Diaz, Kanji, Kovacic and Rodri, this 5 here, and then you've got your front 5 of Doku, Alvarez, Foden and Walker and Haaland. Now the issue is what people are talking about when they talk about creativity is Kyle Walker's involved in the play. So if Kyle Walker's involved in the front 5, more often than not, the creativity is going to be lacking down that side because that's not his game. Kyle Walker is not known for crossing the ball on a sixpence. He's not Kevin De Bruyne. Phil Foden's not Kevin De Bruyne. Alvarez is not Kevin De Bruyne. Nobody's Kevin De Bruyne. So you are going to miss that. Ilkay Gundogan, huge figure that's been missing for Manchester City, and that's probably where normally those 2 players last season, Alvarez and Phil Foden, would have been Kevin De Bruyne and Ilkay Gundogan. And the reason those two sit there like that is because you've got to have two players right behind Erling Haaland because he needs that support. We're not playing the false nine anymore. We're playing an out-and-out number 9, which is Erling Haaland. And he needs players behind him to supply balls down these channels here and down these channels here. If we play the triangles out wide, Kyle Walker is not the greatest in getting involved in using those triangles. So for me, it's an okay system. We won our first 6 games of the season playing this way, and I think teams weren't expecting it. The issue, the positive for John Stones coming back, for me, is now that John Stones would likely go in there. For me, normally we've seen John Stones tucking in. At the end of last season, this is what it was looking like without the ball. Akanji would start normally at right back. We saw a lot of that in the final 10 games of the season with Rodri behind there. But with the ball, John Stones would push forward. Now, John Stones, for me, I've already mentioned his dribbling ability. He's an absolute serene player, so composed on the ball, and his dribbling ability is totally underrated. Now, he's an out-and-out defender, so not only is it great going forward, he is probably one of the bravest in Manchester City's team at breaking the lines of the opposition defenders and midfield blocks that are getting the ball to these two players. You need Alvarez and Foden on the ball as much as possible. That's what we need more often than not. But in reality, what we could do is lose Walker here and have Kovacic probably playing instead and keep Foden more out wide, which I know a lot of people don't agree with, but for me, that's going back to last season's successes. Last season, we had more success with out-and-out players, and Phil Foden being out here, you're going to get more creativity in those triangles. But John Stones' involvement is not just going forward at breaking the lines, defensively as well. He's an out-and-out defender. A pure solid defender. So if the ball was to come down this hand side of the pitch, normally John Stones would have to cut across here. Now, what that does here is leave a big gap, doesn't it? If they counter us, so this is preventing counter-attacks, if they come down the left side, what you don't want to see is that situation here where there's a big gap. Akanji's been pulled wide and John Stones goes wide here. So normally what you see now is that big gap is what you don't want there. That's what you don't want. You want to avoid that at all costs. But what John Stones does naturally is he would tuck in there rather than coming out wide. And what we've seen previously with Zinchenko, we've seen it with Cancelo, we've seen it with Rico Lewis, all playing as inverted fullbacks. Instead of being an inverted fullback, they're halfbacks, as they're being called now. I think that's the right position for John Stones to play as a centre-back who pushes forward into that position with the ball, because when that gap appears there, a fullback, an inverted fullback, Cancelo, Zinchenko, Rico Lewis, whoever it may be, their instinct is to go out wide and support the wide play, prevent the counter-attack coming down that side. You don't want Rico Lewis tucking inside there. You don't want Cancelo tucking in there or Zinchenko when he was playing. Those type of players, that's why Pep went for John Stones in that position and why it works so well, because on the counter-attacks, without the ball, naturally a centre-back tucking into a centre-back position, you feel at home. You feel at home. And I think this is going to be the future of Manchester City for the rest of the season. I'm hoping we see more of this going forward because I think John Stones is going to be a huge figurehead. The issue is Kevin De Bruyne coming back as well. So if you remove that and bring in Kevin De Bruyne, for example, then all of a sudden, look at that. When John Stones comes back, that's what we're familiar with, isn't it, as City fans? That's what we're familiar with. That 5 dominating the ball from the back, Phil Foden outright. I know people want to see Foden tucking inside, but if Kevin De Bruyne comes back, he isn't good enough compared to Kevin De Bruyne. Phil Foden is not Kevin De Bruyne. Arguably, we could see this later on, where Foden, if there is no Kevin De Bruyne, Phil Foden could naturally tuck inside, and without there, we could see that sort of system where Jack Grealish goes back onto his left side and Jeremy Doku on the right. That's a system we could play against Brighton. But John Stones for me is vital because Kovacic playing in that role here, has he got the legs to do it? Has he got the defensive nous to drop into defensive centre-back positions when we don't have the ball? Whereas I think John Stones now for me is the answer to our creativity. And albeit it sounds like a defensive substitution, bringing John Stones is going to give creativity, but he's going to be alongside Rodri. So the solidity of these two players in there, we've seen Rodri break the lines, we've seen John Stones break the lines, and those two were doing it in a Champions League final. John Stones in the Champions League final had more touches in the opposition half, in the opposition box, than he did in his own box. So that's what we're offering with John Stones. It's not a defensive substitution, and John Stones and Rodri are going to break the lines and get the ball into the two creative players that are going to want to feed it down the channels to Erling Haaland, and John Stones is going to be an absolute key. He's going to be key to this, and I can't wait. I cannot wait Blues, get your comments in below. How important do you think the return of John Stones actually is for Manchester City? Because I think this is going to be a mainstay for the rest of the season. John Stones is going to decide a lot of games. Arguably now, Pep has multiple situations where he can play different formations. Kyle Walker will still need to play, because we saw last season how important John Stones was because he benched Kyle Walker from the start of the season. Not from the start, from the last period, the title run-in, the start of the title run-in. From this period of last 20 games, Kyle Walker was barely getting any minutes in the team. So I think this is going to be, going forward, what we'll do. Hey, he's got options. Kyle Walker can now play up and down that right wing if needed. If we go up against a speedy winger that we might need to cover in those situations, I could see Kyle Walker playing instead of Akanji as part of a back three. And that system could work where instead of Akanji, it could be Kyle Walker tucking inside. But for me, John Stones coming back is absolutely huge. Blues, get your comments in below. I really want to hear what you think of John Stones' return. Who is going to make this defensive midfield the biggest blue wall that we want to stop opposition from breaking us down? And have they got enough going forward with Rodri and John Stones in defensive midfield? Get your comments in below. I really want to hear them. Like and subscribe. Typical City is the channel, and I'll see you in the next one.
This is Typical City now. Holding up Silverwood.